you cannot just take pure NAD in a capsule, despite all of the Amazon sellers still promoting this. 100% purity, the best purity NAD. It's like, it doesn't matter what the purity is, it will not survive through the gut.
How you landed on that particular subject at such a deep level, and what you found out really works the very best to support the body in the mitochondrial energy.
So when we're young, we have very high levels of NAD, but unfortunately, as we get older, it seems to decline. So the ways that people were trying to fix the NAD decline or boost NAD levels was just ignoring all what the science showed us. So that's a very stupid idea, because NAD is very unstable. So we know that we can actually manipulate this in our bodies without having to take a drug. We now know the reason why NAD declines. And the reason is because
So welcome to the Younger Than Yesterday, and I'm here with a very fascinating individual, Dr. Nichola, who has some very deep data on things that make the human body work at a far superior level. And that is going to be the most intriguing thing for you. So, Dr. Nichola, I would love to hear your story about where you are right now. How did you get there? What your mission is, and what stimulated this scientific discovery that you've been involved in for a long time.
Yeah, so a really winding story, I guess. I never thought I would end up where I am today, which is I am the founder and the lead scientist in a company called Nuchido. And basically, the mission of our company is, how do we take the latest scientific breakthroughs in the field of longevity science and turn them into products that the average consumer can actually access. So I'm very passionate about how we can translate science into something that can benefit people. But certainly several years ago, if you'd have said that I would be running a company that did this, I would have probably laughed, because it was never something that was really on my radar. So I guess taking a few steps back of how I got to this place, first of all, I have always just been super interested in the body. I just think it's incredible that we are just, sitting here today, conscious, alive, having this conversation, and everything that has to go on inside every single cell to make this happen is always mind-blowing. So I've always had this fascination with biology, and that's what led me to go down this scientific career. So I did my bachelor's, I did a master's, then I ended up going on and doing a PhD. And my PhD was actually all about the absorption of and the bioavailability of different drugs and nutrients, and how when we take things orally, do they actually get to our cells or get inside our cells where they have their effect. When I was working in academia doing my PhD, I kind of had this realization that science could be quite lonely, especially scientific research, and that as a researcher, you're kind of in a bench or in a room, usually on your own, doing all of this incredible research. And then it almost becomes, very locked within a science lab, and it never actually gets out to help people. So I decided maybe academia wasn't for me. And that led me to looking for a job where I thought we could translate the science to people. So in my naivety at the time, I thought that going to work in drug development would be the way to do that. So off I went after my PhD. I worked in Big Pharma in early phase drug development. And initially I worked on cancer therapies. And then I got this amazing opportunity where I got to lead a project that was looking at drugs to effectively slow the aging process. So drugs to slow cellular aging, with the kind of understanding being that age is our biggest risk factor for many of the diseases that drugs companies are trying to target. So it was that point that I became fascinated by the longevity space. But there were two things that really frustrated me. First of all, there was all this amazing science that showed us that we really could improve the health of our lives for longer, improve our health span. But there was this huge, lengthy drug development process, which means that any of the science kind of doesn't get out to people for about 15, 17 years. And also, a big part of my job was looking at how we could patent these drugs. So I would literally get lists of molecules back from the lab. And part of my job would be, can we patent these molecules as a company? And quite often, the things that worked really well were not your traditional drug molecules. They were actually natural molecules that drugs companies aren't interested in because they cannot patent and own them. They want to look for new chemical entities, things that people don't own. So I was sort of sat there going, okay, commercially, I totally get this. You know, you need to be able to patent and own something to warrant the huge development costs. But ethically, we know that these molecules are actually really good and they work really well. And we know they're safe. We know the toxicity. They've been used for many years in foods and supplements. And we're just putting them in the bin and stopping that research. Like, why can we not do something with these molecules? So at that point, I kind of decided the drug route wasn't for me. I didn't agree with the ethical side of it. And I left and I founded Nuchido, the company I'm at now, in 2017. And the goal here was, how do we take those molecules that are not drugs, that don't get the research they deserve, and actually give them the research they deserve, and, you know, bring them out as consumer products, whether that's supplements or topicals, but things that are not regulated as drugs, because it doesn't necessarily have to be a drug to actually work. And this is the mindset shift that we have to have as a society. So yeah, that is how I ended up where I am today. And yeah, I am obsessed with longevity science. I'm obsessed with science and trying to make it more accessible. And that really is my mission.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And, you know, to kind of go back and summarize it, you've been a data analysis for a long time, because the data you put into your body is into your biological supercomputer has to be clean data, has to be readable by your body, and it has to be like broad spectrum, where you've got the whole orchestra playing. You're not just hitting one single molecule that affects one biomarker that's studied and took hundreds of millions of dollars to go, oh, we can make billions off of this. Let's give everybody this one and look at the claims. But yet there's all the side effects from the pharma industry with all these different isolates.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I also, you know, to be fair, I actually was really lucky in my experience in Big Pharma, in that I worked for a company that actually was more forward thinking than most pharmaceutical companies, in that it specialized in something called network pharmacology, which is where they don't just look at a single molecule, they actually look at combinations of molecules. So at least it was a step up advanced, but still the issue was that things do not have to be a traditional, you know, drug molecule to actually work. But indeed, you're completely right in that, you know, the body is incredibly complex. How could we ever think that using one molecule designed to target one thing could ever make an impact in our bodies? It's just not practical. Our bodies are highly redundant systems. You know, you can impact one thing, you've got another 5 things going on behind the scenes that are all doing the same. So yeah, we're very naive to think that we could ever target one thing with one molecule and have a very specific effect.
Right. And then you don't require a monograph on the natural products, because you'd have to then turn it into a drug. So when you stay within the supplement natural product space and you found out how to combine these different molecules that are naturally occurring, that are not patentable, but they're actually intellectual property because of your knowledge with the deep dive into what works with what, and what is the precursors, what are the stimulators that work in the body to allow the body to get its youth span, because that's the new term I just recently heard about, is youth span. Because we talk about health span, lifespan, longevity. I think, you know, we see a lot of people get older and their life is really not great quality, but, you know, our discoveries are combining things that actually increase the healthiness of the person the older they get. The longer they're on the earth, the more they do the right things, the more you support your internal system to get healthier in every category every day, which is what our mission is. That's what the whole Younger Than Yesterday is all about. And that's why someone like yourself, who has gone very deep into certain areas, and especially involving your NAD research, which I'm really interested in understanding the foundation of that, how you landed on that particular subject at such a deep level, and what you found out really works the very best to support the body in the mitochondrial energy.
Yeah, I mean, when I started to get into the longevity space, this was 10 years ago now. This was really when the first hallmarks of aging paper had just come out. And, so this area of longevity science was still, even within the scientific community, considered very new. We were still really trying to understand what was happening at the cellular level to drive the aging process. And I, did a huge deep dive into all the different hallmarks of aging, all the different ways that many different scientists and labs and experts were claiming, these are the root causes of aging, or this is what's driving aging. It's mitochondrial function, it's senescence, it's inflammation, it's our epigenetics, all the different schools of thought. And what I kept coming back to was NAD for a number of reasons, because, I could have pursued any of those different routes. At the time, it was kind of like a blank canvas of which things do we want to look into. And the reason I kept coming back to NAD was it seemed that it didn't matter what the, suggested root cause of aging was or what the hallmark of aging was. NAD seemed to play some sort of role and seemed to have some sort of impact on it. It was like one of these molecules that was just, so promiscuous and so involved in so many things in the body that it kind of had a universal effect across all of the different hallmarks of aging. In fact, I think it's still only the one thing that's been found to actually impact all of the now 12 hallmarks of aging. And the other thing that kept bringing me back to NAD was also the fact that it had been demonstrated that it was a molecule that you could increase the levels of through a dietary supplement. And at the time, it was that people were looking at increasing NADs in dietary supplements called NMN or NR. So there was two things here where it was like, okay, there's a great amount of evidence that this positively impacts the underlying root causes of aging. And there are already demonstrable effects with something that is not a drug. So we know that we can actually manipulate this in our bodies without having to take a drug. But when I looked into all the science behind how people were increasing NAD, that is when I started to look at this whole network effect of, okay, what's happening in the body to drive NAD decline. And probably a good thing to point out at this point is for most people have heard of NAD, but for anyone that hasn't heard of NAD, what actually is it? So basically, NAD is a natural molecule, first of all, that's found in all of our cells in our bodies. And it's involved in estimated to be around 300 different cellular reactions. But the two things that it's most important for, or I guess most famous for, are first of all, energy production. So this is in our mitochondria, the energy powerhouses of our cells. NAD is part of the Krebs cycle that literally takes glucose from the food that we eat and converts it into ATP, which is the energy currency of the cell. And NAD is very important for that reaction. So NAD, very important for energy production. The other thing is that it's very important for powering a lot of cellular repair processes. So NAD almost acts like a fuel to power multiple different repair pathways. So things like DNA repair enzymes, the sirtuins, some inflammatory responses. NAD is literally the fuel for this process. So when we're young, we have very high levels of NAD, but unfortunately, as we get older, it seems to decline. And as NAD declines, it means we're not as efficient at producing energy in our cells anymore. It means that we're not as efficient at repairing. And then you start to see cellular damage. And ultimately, the cellular damage manifests as the kind of physical signs and symptoms of aging that we experience. So this is why scientists suddenly became interested in NAD, because they thought, well, if it's so powerful to protect and repair and energize our cells, and it declines as we get older, then why don't we just not let it decline? Why don't we keep levels topped up? So this is where we started to see the first bits of research come out, looking at boosting NAD levels.
Yeah, which is a very interesting phenomenon because all of a sudden it started to trend. You get all these companies coming online and they're selling like, I don't know, billions of dollars of NAD products now, whether it's injectables like IV or subcutaneous or all these different ways that people talk about getting it in the body. What are your thoughts around, like, it just seems so inflammatory to go in the IV route. People always complain about a lot of pain and suffering, super high cost. And really what you're talking about is getting the body's own NAD engine like refired up.
Exactly that. So when I first looked at the NAD space and thought, this is really interesting, and I looked at what people were doing and in the kind of trials, the research that was happening, and I saw that the different ways that people were trying to boost NAD, and I looked at what all the science showed about why NAD declined, nothing quite added up. So the ways that people were trying to fix the NAD decline or were trying to boost NAD levels was kind of like just ignoring all what the science showed us. So just to put it into perspective. So when scientists kind of realized, I guess we'll do a little history of the different types of ways to boost NAD. That might be helpful. So when scientists realized that NAD was something we wanted to boost, the first thing that people started doing was taking oral NAD. So pure NAD, take it in an oral capsule. Very, very quickly, it was established that that's a very stupid idea because NAD is very unstable. So in the body, it's what we call a redox molecule, which means it flips between different states and breaks down and rebuilds very, very easily. That is physiologically what it's supposed to do. And that means it's, even just having NAD in a capsule on the lab bench will degrade. It is very, very unstable, so it doesn't survive the gut. So number one, you cannot just take pure NAD in a capsule, despite all of the Amazon sellers still promoting this, 100% purity, the best purity NAD. It's like, it doesn't matter what the purity is, it will not survive through the gut. It's extremely unstable. So this is then when the sort of IVs and these injections started to become popular, because the thought process there was, okay, you can't take it orally and it's unstable, so why don't we just make it up fresh every time and then infuse it straight into the blood? You bypass the gut, it gets it into the body. And yes, it prevents the gut degradation, but the other property of NAD is that it's a very large molecule and it's also charged. And large charged molecules cannot just pass freely into our cells. So an IV or an injection will get it into the blood, but NAD doesn't actually do anything in the blood. It's not naturally found there in high concentrations. It's naturally supposed to be within our cells. That is where the mitochondria are. That is where the DNA is. That is where every pathway that NAD interacts with is inside the cells. And most cells do not have channels big enough to let NAD basically pass in. So what we find, and in fact, there's still only 2 human studies, believe it or not, looking at what happens to NAD when you put it in as an IV. The first one shows that it seems to be very rapidly broken down into the precursors and then excreted, or some of the precursors might get taken up. The second study, more worryingly, that is about to be published, it's in a preprint at the moment, shows that it actually causes an inflammatory reaction in the blood, which is exactly what we do not want to be happening. And, we know inflammation drives aging. But again, it's not surprising because, first of all, you've just put a huge amount of something that should only be found inside the cells into the blood. So what the body recognizes this as is there's some sort of trauma or there's some sort of damage where loads of the cellular contents is being released, and it goes into survival mode, releasing inflammatory factors as a precaution to try and deal with whatever this trauma has been. And also as you mentioned, people that have these IVs feel terrible. They feel nauseous. They have palpitations, they feel really not good. And a lot of doctors will say, oh no, this shows that you're detoxing or, that it's working. But really there's, all of the evidence, all of the scientific evidence suggests that this is not a good idea. So this is then where precursors kind of then became much more popular. So they are NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide, or NR, nicotinamide riboside. They're both B vitamin precursors, vitamin B3. And effectively what they are is the building block for NAD. So they basically the idea here being that they're smaller than NAD, they can get into the cells. So then once they're in the cells, hopefully the cell will take the raw material and it will turn it into NAD. And we know to a certain extent this does happen. But what we now know is that actually this is also problematic, because we now know the reason why NAD declines. And the reason is because the enzyme that literally takes these precursors and turns it into NAD, that actually declines with age. Right. So taking a precursor, I always use like a factory analogy. It's kind of like, going into a factory, an NAD producing factory, and seeing that all the machines are broken and then saying, oh, well, how do we increase our production? Let's just ignore the broken machines and we'll just order some more raw material and hope we get more NAD. Like, you would never do that. You'd say, we need to fix the machines. We need to actually, fix the root cause of this problem. So when I started looking at this space, we were like, right, how can we design a next generation of NAD booster where we're not ignoring the reason why NAD declines, but we're actually fixing it? So is there a way that we can actually switch those enzymes back on? Can we actually increase levels of our own natural NAD production and just fix the reason why it's declined in the first place?
That's the proper approach. And I love your analogy about the broken equipment in the production facility. You can get all the raw material you want. And I see very, very few results. I know there's people who make claims that it's, wonderful, the subcutaneous, the IVs, aside from all the complaints and the massive, massive amount of money they have to pay to go and get this type of unstable NAD. As soon as they put it in even the liquid, it's destabilizing before they even put it in the body. Then it hits the bloodstream, destabilizes further, causes inflammatory responses. And yet there's billions of dollars sold because of people's belief that, hey, somebody sold me something that I'm going to pay a lot of money for. It's got to work.
It's craziness. I mean, I'm always public enemy number one with these doctors, because the number one question I get asked is, what do I think of NAD IVs? So then I say, well, obviously I have a company that has a competitor product, but as a scientist, I will tell you what the science shows. And the science shows that it doesn't make any sense. And furthermore, why on earth have none of these doctors or companies just done a clinical trial? They're making a huge amount of money. They've already got people hooked up to IVs. Take a blood sample, measure it. Like, it's simple, but nobody's done it. Or whether they have done it and haven't published the results, that would be the question.
Yeah, this is the thing. People don't want the obvious pointed out. Don't rain in their parade. Don't make them look like they're really not delivering value. So that's why, but actually what you're doing is you're delivering significant value, because if these same doctors and naturopaths and, people who are administering this stuff would go, hold it, what are you talking about? You mean there's a different way, a far superior way, a much more affordable way? We can go and fix some broken machinery inside the body, and we can replace the lack of the ability to produce natural NAD and get going back to the root cause, not just the surface level. And you're not there to just sell people stuff. I've come to the conclusion that I am not interested in convincing people anymore of anything. I'm not interested in selling people on anything, because when you think about yourself, you're passionate about your mission. You are determined about your mission because there was a revelatory amount of data that finally came together and went, hey, this is a breakthrough. And you convinced yourself, you sold yourself. So when we give the proper data for people to sell themselves rather than waiting for us to sell them on something, we are simply supplying legitimate, quantified and qualified data about this, and this. They make their own decision. They become very passionate and determined, because passion isn't the only thing. It's determination to go forward, because you've had a lot of resistance in your life. You've gone through all these different iterations to come to these breakthroughs, to have something that's actually of great value to people that they then see the results in. Because at the end of the day, it's all about the physical body getting better and having that youthfulness coming in. It's like the fountain of youth without claiming it's the fountain of youth. The other thing I like about what you're doing is you don't have to make any kind of medical claims. Is people will see the results. They educate themselves by simply putting these very specific natural combinations of product in the body that the body resonates with, and then starts to refire up its own NAD production based on natural things that do no harm. Number one, you're not going to get the inflammatory response. You're not going to spend a ton of money doing it. You're going to be investing in yourself with a return on that investment that is measurable, and that now avoids all of the hype, all the shiny objects, all the people selling stuff that you and I both know don't work at all. In fact, they may even be harmful. And just stay at the do no harm as the first rule, and do as much powerful good as possible. And so now in the stage of your development with your current product that you formulated, is it sort of a constant improvement, or how, like, because you obviously had a pretty significant ramp up to where you are now. What do you see in the future for development and improving what you already have?
Yeah. And you know what? This is such an important question. And this is something I talk about with a lot, in that, as scientists, we understand that science changes and we learn more. And this is something that's so important within the longevity space, because, as an area of scientific research, it is still quite new. We're still really at the start of really understanding this whole, biological complexity of aging. And as the years go by, we're going to keep learning things. So it might be that, at the moment, I believe that I know to the best of my ability, every single reason why NAD is declining, and know that the product is designed to fix all these reasons. But it might be that in a couple of years, something else comes out and something's published that shows us another thing. And we're like, okay, we need to incorporate this. So I think this is really a really important point, in that we have to be continually keeping up to the date with the science. And I think this is a huge problem with things like companies that are selling things like NMN and NR, that they have patented these molecules and now they are almost tied to them, and they have just turned off their vision to any new science coming through, and they are just so laser focused on this one molecule that they're ignoring all of the other problems. So for example, we know people that are taking NMN can get problems with methylation, because again, going back to this factory analogy, if you are plowing in loads of NMN, loads of raw material into a factory, a cell that does not have the equipment to turn it into anything, then it starts to build up. And we see this even in some of the human clinical trials with NMN itself and NR. We see that these precursors build up. And what happens is, when they build up, the cell doesn't like this. It likes to maintain homeostasis. So the cell then switches on another enzyme, which is designed to methylate and excrete these precursors. So methylation acts as like a tagging system. So it's like putting a tag on all these ingredients and telling the cell to kind of get rid of them. Now, that deals with this immediate problem, but methyl groups are actually very important for a lot of much more significant things in the cell, like epigenetics, DNA repair. And what it means is that we're using all this precious supply of methyl tags to get rid of this waste when really it should be getting used for more precious things. And we start to see people become methyl donor depleted. So then people go, oh, well, you just take trimethylglycine, TMG, to kind of get rid of this problem. So then you see all these companies saying, yeah, well, you can buy NMN and you buy some TMG and you take them together. And then we're back to the whole pharmaceutical problem if you take one drug to fix a problem that another drug has created, apart from we're now seeing this in the supplement world, which is absolute craziness. So yeah, I think it's a really significant issue. So what we've done is we have looked at, right, NAD is declining in the cell. What are all of the reasons that scientifically we know now of why this is happening? Number one, it's because the enzyme is called NAMPT. This enzyme that makes NAD declines with age. Number two, we also know that the demand for NAD goes up as we get older. So older cells have more damage, they've got more inflammation, the demand naturally increases. And actually, one of the main reasons the demand for NAD increases is due to chronic low-grade inflammation. So if you are to look on the cells of an older person, what you will see is they have a much higher level of something called CD38. And CD38 is an inflammatory enzyme. It drives an inflammatory response. And, inflammation is good in the right circumstances. But as we get older, we have these CD38 enzymes that are just chronically switched on at a low level, just firing away. And they actually use NAD as a fuel. So they are just eating up NAD behind the scenes, even when we're not really supposed to be using it. And again, a lot of studies show that, and this is one of our biggest NAD consumers. So not only have we got a problem with production in the cells, but we've also got a problem with our cells wasting NAD as well.
Yeah.
So we really wanted to look at how can we look for different ingredients that are actually targeting all these problems. So some of the natural ingredients we have in our product are actually switching back on the enzyme to get rid of this production issue. Some of the ingredients are actually inhibiting this inflammatory response. They're inhibiting the CD38 to reduce this wastage of NAD. And then some of the other ingredients in the product are also dealing with this methylation issue. So we kind of say it's like a whole systems approach to dealing with all the different root causes of NAD decline in the cell.
And so that's where it becomes complementary rather than you're not like trying to compensate with a reaction that's bad to a reaction that's good. There's natural reactions that are just not good within the body as the person gets older because of those measurable things. The CD38 is a measurable thing.
Yeah.
And when you show that result with the decline in that element that's causing that problem and wasting NAD, where people end up, the older they get, the longer they live. They could even get into Parkinson's, which is like super dumping they're just wasting NAD.
Yeah.
And we're already producing too little. So I love things that are complementary. And I love the fact that you pointed out that we're not in the drug industry. We're not taking something that's harming us and then trying to find another thing to fix it, between the TMG and whatever. And that's actually really permeated the industry. And it kind of sells more product too. It's all about the money-making thing. We can make more money if we have this, and that will help a little bit, but it will do some damage. But then we can add this in there. And people get very confused, and they don't get the benefit because if I'm selling something to someone, and you're selling something to someone, if we have a perceived value that they're actually going to engage and invest in themselves with that perceived value, we better give a much higher received value. What I found in the so-called natural products industry is that much of it is high perceived value with a very low, if zero, received value because of whatever's trending and everybody jumps on bandwagon. So your work is essential because you've gone and looked at the data. You're transparent. You've got nowhere to hide. You're not interested in hiding. And when you do that, it does expose those who are hiding behind information that they know they really should look at. But because they're so deeply invested and they've got their board of directors and their board of investors looking at them going, hey, we invested in this. You better make this go.
Yeah.
right? We don't want to hear about that there might be an issue here. You better cover your bases and you better stick to the course and you better get your story right. But the story is not right. And the
Yeah.
story shows up because
And it's it is crazy because it also means that any further scientific research is pushed towards something that we know doesn't work. I mean, looking at all of the resources that are going into trials on precursors alone, even though we know that it's not even fixing the issue, is craziness. And I think two things. First of all, when I started a supplement company after leaving a very credible job in drug development, a lot of people frowned at me. A lot of people said, wow, what are you doing? Supplements don't work. It's snake oil. You're leaving, you've done all this training to get a really amazing job and you've thrown it all away. And I was like, no, first of all, like your body does not understand or does not, differentiate between what is a drug, what is a supplement, what is a natural molecule. All of these things have, an equally powerful effect in the body. They all have a physiological effect. It's just somebody's took these and put them in categories that as a society, we now assume that one category is going to have a better effect than the other. But actually, that is absolutely not the case. The second thing is that then when I obviously came into the NAD space and said, well, what everyone's doing doesn't make sense. Let's just take a step back and look at the fact that our bodies, when we were younger, made NAD very, very well. In fact, most people don't realize that we do not get any NAD from the diet. It is all made within our cells. We have an NAD production pathway. It's called the salvage pathway that literally makes and recycles NAD. And when we're young, it works amazingly. But something happens as we get older to stop it from working as well. And that's what we now know. We know why this issue is. So let's go back to this state of youthfulness, like we were talking about earlier, your youth span. Everything that we need in our bodies to be young and healthy is already there. For some reason, it changes as we get older. Let's try and get the cells acting back in the way that they did when they were younger. So in the case of NAD, let's get that NAD production pathway fired up again. Let's stop the cells from wasting NAD and just basically get our cell doing what it did very well anyway. We don't have to ignore this problem. And again, a lot of people are like, well, no, this is ridiculous. So again, being completely transparent, I went away and I published a review paper, which brought together all of the evidence that everyone else just seemed to be ignoring about these are the reasons why NAD declines. So while everyone else is over here arguing about whether NR is better than NMN or NMN is better than NR, we're actually forgetting about all of this, which is actually why it's declining. And why don't we fix this? So then we develop our product and everyone's like, oh, it doesn't contain NMN and it doesn't have NR. It can't possibly work. So we're like, okay, we're going to do a full double-blind, placebo-controlled crossover study, a gold standard study. And this is what we demonstrated. We actually demonstrate in this study that you absolutely can switch back on natural NAD production. So we measured levels of the enzyme in people and show that it actually goes up. You can reactivate it. We also show that NAD goes up because we've obviously increased the production capacity of the cells. And then even furthermore, we then go, well, okay, we've increased NAD, but does this actually have a beneficial effect? So do we see the positive impact of NAD that we would expect? So we went and measured inflammation. We showed a reduction in inflammation. So again, we're showing that the NAD is actually doing positive things in the body rather than driving inflammation. We also saw a reduction in glycation. We also measured biological age. We saw a reversal of biological age in the participants by an average of 1.26 years. And this was in just 26 days. So this demonstrates that actually, if you can fix the problem and you can boost NAD, you can have really significant benefits because again, it's putting your body back in this state of youth span where it's doing everything as it should.
Right. And you're not continuously going downhill by congesting the body with elements that it can't use. with the broken equipment, with all the methylation pathways screwed up and this inflammatory response coming on. It's pretty obvious that it's a measurable thing now, which you were willing to go and look at face to face and be real about it, because at the end of the day, everything is mathematical. Everything is true science. It's not some pseudoscience trying to produce a white paper that looks like you should buy my product. Forget that, right? You're looking at a real human body, measurable, and we have to decongest it. What I found out is that people are aging. One of the biggest factors that cause that is what we're breathing. We're breathing 11,000 liters of air a day. There's PM 2.5 in quadrillion molecules in the air, which is particulate matter, 2.5 nanometers. Comes from all the pollutants, whether it's tire dust or brake dust or burn fuel that didn't go properly. We're breathing this stuff, and we have to get it out. We've got to be able to empower the body to be able to detoxify itself from all the general pollution. And it's so real. That's all measurable. And putting all the complementary things together so that now the production facility is clean and it's efficient. It has visibility. If you have tons of soot in your body, your receptor sites are like, I'm getting blind. I got stuff coming in, I can't even see it. So we got to clear the pathways, bring in the elements that are usable. And it's like clean energy coming in means it gets used up and you don't get that residual effect of that, like burning a bonfire. You've got your wood and you light it on fire and it releases all the heat and it's amazing and it smokes and it off gases. But at the end of the day, there's charcoal sitting there. And that's a deposit that remains behind. And we have to make sure we get all the charcoal out because we are burning a lot of raw material, whether it's the food we eat, the foods we drink, the things we consume through our skin, or the supplements we take. We got to make sure it's very, very clean and being used appropriately. It's not too much. It's not too little. It's that fine dance for our body's energy system and our metabolism in our youth span to increase. Now, just before we go, there's some interesting things that I'll share with you offline, and then we can talk about it again afterwards. There is a very simple way, which has been discovered, what I call a major breakthrough, that's super complementary to what you're doing, and what you're doing is super complementary to this. And this is actually a stabilized form of NAD that can be done sublingually. It is non-inflammatory. It's 100% usable. Does not go into the bloodstream. It's stable, and that's so when you can fire that up, you bring in the engine repair. You're bringing in the equipment repair. We don't just want a Band-Aid. We could ramp out the NAD until we've seen remarkable results. I'll give you an example. Some of the worst case results are when people are going to go into a rehab center. They're addicted to whatever. Could be benzos, fentanyl, alcohol, doesn't matter. And they have depleted their NAD so heavy duty that they are going to die. And somebody does an intervention and spends 30 to 50 grand to get them into these rehabs, and they suffer like mad for 5 days in the withdrawals and the DTs and whatever. And when they apply this stabilized form sublingually, they get no withdrawal at all. They can eat, sleep, and exercise with no suffering.
Wow.
We're like, okay, that worked. What's with that? And this is just a pure form of stabilized NAD that goes sublingual. Well, that's great. And yes, that does a very significant ramp up, and it helps people's autoimmune and all this stuff and whatever. But that is only like a kickstart. What you're bringing in is the long game, because you're helping the body get all that stuff sorted out. We don't just want a quick fix. We want something that is going to bring it up right away, but then maintain it into the future.
Yeah, and this is so important because, again, when you look at what happens to NAD when it's in the cell, what the salvage pathway does is actually when NAD is used up, so say it's used by DNA repair, it's used by the sirtuins, anything like that, what actually happens is in that reaction, the NAD gets split apart again back into its precursors, specifically nicotinamide. And then it's this nicotinamide that then has to be scooped back up by this enzyme, this NAMPT enzyme, and then recycled back into fresh NAD again. So again, it's absolutely what you're saying. It doesn't matter how NAD is getting in the cell or increasing in the cell. Once that NAD is being used once, it has to have the capacity to be recycled again. Because if it doesn't, then the precursors build up. So you get this same issue where you're starting to get a buildup of raw material because the body then can't recycle it again. So absolutely what you've just said, it's all about the long game. It's about how do we make sure the cell has that capacity to still keep reusing NAD, because we know as soon as it's been used once, it needs to be recycled. So you want to have longevity in any NAD that's in the cell by making sure the cell does have the capacity to recycle it once it's actually being used, rather than it getting used once and then basically being chucked out of the cell.
Right. Yeah. So this is double breakthrough stuff, and we'll see, because complementary things is what we're looking for.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm here to complement your work. You're here to complement ours, because we're here to serve the human race. We're not here to make billions of dollars off of people. We're here to flow energy that has to be funded, that has to be paid for, that has to have a proper margin for growth, that has to serve people. You know, what you've done would cost people millions of dollars to go and do. But you were called to a mission. You've gone out, you arranged the energy to discover what you have. You paid the price by learning from that original pharmaceutical experience and going, hold it, there's something so flawed about this. I've really got to find a position where where you're really called. And then you have invested all that, just like I went for the last 20 years. We invested over about 33 to 35 million of money we earned just to go and find out what works and doesn't work, and set up the manufacturing and have the pure molecules of things that are actually usable in the body.
Yeah.
And those things are also all complementary, but they don't involve the NAD from the activation side.
Yeah.
We were not focused on that. You focused on that. So when we bring all these elements together, now we have a combination for simplicity.
Yeah.
People don't have to jump through every hoop and chase their tail and become a health nut. They just want to be healthy. Because each person who is listening to this has a mission that you're serving, and we're here to serve each other. We're here to love
Absolutely. It's such a common mission. And, you know, I think you probably get this a lot as well. You know, people go, but why would we believe you? Because you sell a product. But I think what they don't realize is that actually we're scientists before products, you know, and as scientists, you know, we really want to make sure that we're doing everything to the best ability, to the best standards. There's so much gone into it before it becomes a product, you know, compared to, like you said before, people that just jump on the bandwagon and there's absolutely no thought, but they've got a huge marketing team. This is all about the mission. You know, for me as well, it's all about the education. I spend so much time educating people, and yeah, if they buy it, amazing. You know, that's gonna fund it. We try to make it as accessible as possible. And the funniest bit about it is that so many people are skeptical, and then they try it, and then they come back and they go, oh, I feel so much better. Like, I have so much energy. My brain fog is gone. Like, I've seen this, I've seen that. And they're like, it works. And I'm like, I know.
Right.
You know, it's made to work. You know, why would we make anything that we didn't think was going to work? I'd like to say that we are definitely changing lives, and that's what the mission is all about.
And that's how you change the world as much as you can, by changing lives one at a time, and thousands of people at a time, and then eventually millions of people, once people realize what is actually going on, where they make their decisions for themselves and their families and their well-being. So we really covered a lot. That was so good. You gave very, very validated, confirmed information. Where can people find you easily to get more information?
So my company's Nuchido, which is spelled Nuchido. You can find us on our website, nuchido.com. Other than that, Instagram, which is just at Nuchido. And for me personally, Instagram is the best place, and it's just at Dr. Nichola Conlon. I'm sure you can pop that in the notes. But yeah, if you want to if you want to listen to me speak about a lot more than just NADs, follow me on Instagram.
That's great. Yeah, you guys have a wealth of information. So, Nichola, it's been a total pleasure. And
thanks, Ian.
We will look forward to a future interview and more conversations. I want to learn more about all the other work you're doing, which is all going to be further complementary. And then we can just share as much data as we can offline. So the next time we speak, we'll have some even greater golden nuggets, which you've already provided a real gold mine today. So thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.